and welcome in to the first edition of the Bryant Roche Show. I'm Bryant Roche here, and thank you for joining me. It is a Wednesday, maybe a Thursday, maybe even beyond, depending on when you're listening. I'd like to thank all who helped me with this process. Thank you for your input. Thank you for your assistance. Today we're going to talk a little Super Bowl. We're going to talk a little Senior Bowl. Talk about the players of today, the players of tomorrow, and even a little talk about Jacksonville's own Tony Boselli and how he relates to one of the all-time Falcon greats. But first I'm going to start, before I get into the Super Bowl in particular, I'm going to get into the what not to do at your Super Bowl party. My list of most annoying Super Bowl fans at the party. Now, I'm going to start with this. Number one, the Double Dipper. No need to explain. You know what that is. Number two, the one who's obsessed with the commercials. You also know who you are. You're the person during the game who, doesn't care about anything else, or doesn't care about what's going on during the game. You're just chilling, talking to everybody, even eating the food. I don't even care. But then the second that commercial comes on, you're the one who's got to quiet down the whole room, waiting for the next Mean Joe Green ad. And unfortunately, 99.9% of the time, that memorable ad probably isn't going to be on this year, but you're the one that's got to make sure. My number three, I had a bet on this guy. Now, for those of you wondering, this is not anything against those that gamble, not even against those who bet on football games. I'm merely talking about those who have 1,000 prop bets. During the game, they're always analyzing things that people really don't care about, that really don't even pertain to the actual game. I'm talking about the guys with every freaking bet written down. The moment something happens, they're making a big stir about it, whether it's actually important or whether it's not. They've got a timer during the national anthem. They're making sure that Gladys Knight isn't performing for 1:30 versus 1:29. For every time that Roger Goodell shows up on the screen, they've got him counted. If Giselle's got on a blue dress instead of a red one, they lost another prop bet and they're always complaining about it. The small bets that don't even really pertain to anything really, about whether a commercial will last 28 seconds instead of 27. Just annoying crap like that, while the rest of us are trying to actually watch the game, and they are watching the game, but they're just annoying the hell out of you. My next one, and this really encompasses basically everything, but it's number four, the fake fan. This is the person that shows up. They don't watch games during the year. And honestly, for those that really don't watch and they just want to have a good time, I'm not going to take you away from that. But these are the people that pretend to know everything even though they don't. When a false start penalty is thrown, when the flag is thrown, they don't know whether it's 5 yards or 6 yards. They can't tell a difference between who the best player is on each team. If Aaron Donald is on the screen, they have no idea who the heck he is. The only player they know is Tom Brady. They come in and they act like they know everything about the game, but they don't know worth a crap. And lastly, the I only watch when it's halftime. Now, for those of you, you know who I'm talking about. You show up to the main event, you don't actually watch the game, but you care about halftime more than everything else. More power to you, but for me as a football fan, it drives me nuts. It's like you get invited to a wedding, and you don't actually go to the wedding, but you go to the after party, and you're the person that's, just annoying the heck out of the people that actually care about the game, but you decide to blow it in during halftime, and during the game you're just, don't care at all. And while I'm on the topic of the halftime show, I'd like to get into my list of Super Bowl halftime superlatives. Let me know what you think. Feel free to comment. Number 1. Best intro but show let us down. My choice, the Blues Brothers. Now this halftime show really did not live up to expectations. Actually, I don't even know what the expectations were really, but a big letdown for me in general. But they had this nice little Fox News intro, and please don't take that, as something that matters in terms of where you reside politically, but they had this nice little intro. So for me, the intro, I thought it was going to be a lot better than it actually was. Unfortunately, the best intro, but show that let us down, goes to the Blues Brothers. Now, my most forgettable. I had a few nominees on this one. Had Shania Twain on there. Folks, I was alive and well, but I can't tell you a single second of what happened during that show. My next nominee, Coldplay. Not bad. Honestly, it was a hit during the time, but I do remember a couple of their hits. I used to the world. It actually wasn't all that bad, but really it got overshadowed by the whole Beyonce formation thing. So for me, that one does not win. And after that, my other nominee is basically everyone pre-93. I'm talking about all the marching bands, all the Up With People performances, all of those. Now what it comes down to is this. Who's talking about it and who's not? So for me, none of those will be the winner of the most forgettable. For me, it goes to the country group that followed up MJ. And folks, the reason why? I still don't remember who the characters were. Folks, most forgettable, the country groups that followed up MJ. My next one, most predictable. Now for me, it isn't necessarily a bad show, but most predictable for me goes to Tom Petty. You know about Petty. He's calm, he's on the stage, he didn't have a whole lot of other things going on, no crazy choreographic stuff, no, weird things like we saw with the Sharks on the Katy Perry show. For me, Tom Petty, you knew what you were getting. Just him on the stage, American Girl, Won't Back Down, and Free Fallin'. And you know all the girls went nuts when Free Fallin' came on. Great show, but predictable. My superlative for most predictable goes to Tom Petty. Now, my next one. The I Wish It Happened 20, 30, 40 years ago. Several nominees, most of them the older vets. Starting with these, The who sounded a little past their prime, but heck, they could still rock a little bit. My next one, Rolling Stones. Great show. You had Mick Jagger even playing songs that he even admitted could have been played at Super Bowl I. But they had this nice little tongue thing. You know that tongue logo on their albums? They had it on the screen, and then it flipped open and the crowd was under it. I kind of liked that. It was kind of cool. And my next nominee, Paul McCartney, Jacksonville Show. I remember it. The best part of it was easily the Hey Jude part at the end. The rest of it I really don't remember much. And after that, basically every old timer. But for me, the winner for this one goes to the Motown Celebration. Now hear me out. The rest of them were older vets. Definitely were not, during the prime of their careers. But the reason why I chose the Motown Celebration is this. Number one, you had the Temps, but they weren't the original Temps. Imagine freaking David Ruffin out there, and he's freaking hooting, and you got the whole Classic 5 group, and he's singing, My Girl Ain't Too Proud to Beg. You know what I'm talking about. Then you think about the whole Queen Latifah thing, and you're like, why is she up there? Instead of having her, bring it back 30 years before. Bring back the real Marvin Gaye. Have him sing I Heard It Through the Grapevine. Mix in a few numbers, and there you go. Bring it back to the old times. I'm talking about the Motown Celebration. If you had it in 67, if you had it in 67 or 68 instead of when they did it, it would have been a heck of a show. My nominee, it should have happened 20, 30, 40 years ago. Easily, Motown. My next one, best combo that didn't make sense but still worked out. My winner, Bruno Mars and Red Hot Chili Peppers. Now Bruno Mars, a modern R&B singer, and then you have this punk rock group, and you have no idea how the heck they ended up on the same stage. But heck, I like them both, and for me, a big time Red Hot Chili Peppers fan, I really enjoyed it, being an addition. Now my next one, after the combo's gone right, I've got the best pop stars gone wrong. I'm talking about Justin Timberlake and Janet Jackson. You all know what happened. For my younger viewers out there, this happened during the year of Carolina and New England. And let's just say Justin Timberlake got a little too excited on the floor. And with that being said, this performance also wins the award for most sexually unnecessary / provocative and best attempt at overshadowing one of the greatest Super Bowls of all time. My next one, best tribute. This one goes to U2 in 2002. Now, what happened is this. So during the performance, they're singing When Streets Have No Name, great song, and during it, they have this screen come up, and on it, it has the names of all who died during the 9/11 tragedy. And if that doesn't get to your emotions a little bit, I don't know what will. But something about U2, I don't know what it is, but just a classic rock band that for me did it right. And the kicker was Bono's jacket that had the American flag in it. I really liked it. For me, far and away the best tribute. My next one, the I Don't Know What I Just Watched award. This one, I thought about the Timberlake Janet Jackson, but for me, the most shocking, well, maybe not most shocking, but maybe I'll call it the strangest performance, definitely goes to Katy Perry. Not even close. Now, I remember watching the thing, and Katy Perry is on top of this tiger, this artificial tiger that she's riding on. And then a few minutes later, she's with sharks on the stage that have really weird expressions. That's enough for me. Easily. The award for the I Don't Know What I Just Watched award. Katy Perry. Easy. My next one. The best job of dealing with the elements, and it also happens to be possibly the most fitting song given the weather. This award goes to Prince for singing Purple Rain while it was raining. Great performance by Prince. Memorable. Many even give him the award for best performance overall purely because of that. Now give him props. It was in Miami. Stage was wet. And I think I even saw a quote that where someone asked him something about performing in the rain, and he replied, "Can you get it to rain a little harder?" Boy, Prince, he's a performer, and that one was legendary. Now, following that, going from outdoor to indoor, I have the superlative for the most lights out dome performance. This one to Beyonce. You remember it. Ravens 49ers, and the lights just went out. It was so good. The game got delayed for a while. A very very interesting event, and Beyonce gets bonus points for the Destiny's Child's cameo performance. Maybe the best cameo due to the surprise. No one saw it coming, and also no one saw it coming that the lights would go out for a solid hour, it seemed like. My next one, most underrated, going to Diana Ross. It was 1997, not 1967, and she looked and sang just the same. But for me, the best ever, and for me, I had to think about this a little bit, but not for too long. For me, the winner, Michael Jackson. Now here's why, and let me go through it. First off, before the show even starts, you talk about the appeal that Michael had. First off, he's at that stage in his career, 1993, to where he's been around long enough to where the older viewers know who he is, but at the same time, he's still making Dangerous. He's still bringing in hits. So it's like the younger generation and the older generation are both tuned in. Now, I know this, sounds like it happened more often, but really, if I went through all of the shows, trust me, this appeal was unmatched. My next one, going through it, not my next thought. You have this killer James Earl Jones intro. And folks, I don't really need to go much further. It's James freaking Earl Jones, and it was great. Now after the intro, you see Michael on the scoreboard, and then all of a sudden he's flying from the scoreboard, the outside of reality, flying up above the scoreboard on top, and then you see the other scoreboard, and he's flying from the scoreboard up top, and then he flies up onto the stage, and you're like, what? I was just like, what? And then you have this moment where he's on the stage in this uniform, and he's just standing there staring. Now, meanwhile, the crowd has this reaction where they're cheering, and they're like, they have this thought in their head, they're like, when's this going to get started? But at the same time, they're like, well, we've been waiting for 25 years for this thing, so I think we can maybe wait another minute 30. And then finally, the jam music comes on, the song Jam, and he just gets rolling and freaking kills it. Now, what I like about the show is you have Jam, a contemporary hit, but then you also have Billie Jean thrown in, which I would probably say is his, top song, even though he's got like 1,000 different ones he can choose. And then after that, or during that, I should say, he mixes in all the dances. He does the moonwalk. He gives you the crotch grabs, which at the time was acceptable, unlike the whole Janet Jackson thing by contrast. So he does that, and so it's like you get a little bit of everything. And then he has these people in different colors serving as like his choir, but at the same time he's the one that's carrying the show. So instead of some of these other performances where all these other dancers are basically doing all the things, the attention is still on Michael, and that's what I think is a real beauty, is that even though he has everyone involved, he's the one that's still carrying the show. And then after that, he gives you Black or White, another song that was kind of during that time period, early 90s. And then, in my notes. And then you realize he gets into We Are the World eventually. And he's got this wand in his hand, and he kind of flicks it. And you see at the Rose Bowl, which is also great, it's at this historic venue, and they've got in the stands, there's this mural thing that's made of like children holding hands. And then after he gets into that, he sings this Heal the World song, and the place gets absolutely crazy. And he sings the song, and all the children are surrounding him. And the thing that's interesting about that is that even with these other modern Super Bowl shows where the fans are on the stage, in this one, the fans are all around him, no security guards, next to him or whatever. They've got all these fans around him, and they're just all joining together, singing the song, uniting the crowd, really uniting America for that matter. The ratings actually spiked up during this show. Then during the game, it was the year that Dallas beat the Bills 52-17. I'm talking about the Leon Lett got caught from behind and fumbled game. And for me, the emotion, the performance, the way he was able to draw the crowd in, the crowd did not go to the bathroom or go to the concession stand for food or beer. They stayed, and it was awesome. My award for best ever, 1993. Really the original show, other than the all the other marching bands and Up With People and all that jazz. Really the original show where a megastar showed up and put on a performance. Michael Jackson set the bar for every other show, and to me, still hasn't been passed. Now, I talked a little bit about that Dallas Bills game. Now I'm going to talk about this year's game. Starting with a few notes, I think the major storyline that has developed this week, really in general, has been the story regarding Bill Belichick's experience and Sean McVay's kind of being the young star on the rise. In a sense, he's already arrived, but he's got that young coach kind of description. And you saw him after the NFC Championship game. He was running onto the field like a boy after Christmas, and then he kind of has this awkward, oh hey, people are looking at me and stops kind of thing. I gotta, oh man, I gotta roll it back one of these days. But he's got this excited, he's jumping, he's running, and then it's, oh, people are watching me, I gotta stop. Oh man, that was great. And then you kind of have this mindset in your head, you're thinking of Bill Belichick in the hoodie, and you kind of picture him running and jumping or whatever, and you just know it doesn't make sense. And oh man, and I think that's what you gotta love about football, the different types of personalities that can have success in this league. And sure enough, Bill Belichick has had a lot in his career, 261 wins, 123 losses, 30-11 in the postseason. But you just gotta love how the differing personalities will play a role in this one. So let's go through a little bit more. McVay, an offensive guy, likes to go a lot of 11 personnel, which for you terminology wizards, 11 personnel simply just means one running back and one tight end. So really that means he'll have a few receivers out wide most of the time. So he'll have the tight end, running back, and 3 receivers. That normally means they don't have a fullback, which I think is significant. So we'll see how they use that tight end. Can he be used as a blocker? The Patriots, a bend but not break type defense, but at the same time they don't allow a whole lot of they haven't allowed a whole lot of huge plays, I don't think, when it's mattered most. They did allow that screen pass in the AFC Championship game, but really in that whole entire first half, I really felt they kept Kansas City from moving the ball. And I think, a great description of this team, they're an opportunistic team. They force turnovers. So for me, the Rams, what they need to do is they can't get overly excited. Got to take care of the football. Got to be smart with it. In terms of special teams, they have really quite possibly the best punter in the league in John Hecker. You also saw him on a fake punt. So that was always kind of a wild card. But really a great boomer punting the ball. But on the other side for the Patriots, they have a guy in Kyle Van Noy who blocked a punt against Chicago. In my opinion, the Patriots' versatile weapon that they have on the defensive side, a defensive end for the Detroit Lions originally, got shipped off to New England, and Bill Belichick has said that he has been a great leader and model for some of the guys that are with the Patriots but were not drafted by the Patriots. They use them in their blitz packages. He often will line up, standing up in front of the guard. He can also line up on the outside. He'll show blitz sometimes, and then he'll back off in coverage. And for the Rams, we'll see if they use Todd Gurley coming out of the backfield, screen passes. We'll also see if maybe they use some of their speedsters out wide, tunnel screens. Robert Woods, Brandon Cooks, the former Patriot who took one of the worst hits in Super Bowl history last season. My first reaction was that it reminded me a lot of the hit that Chuck Bednarik gave Frank Gifford in a playoff game way back in the day. If you haven't seen it, It's one of the most historic hits in all of football, and that's really what it reminded me of. Some other keys: the Patriots led the league in third down pressure. I think it'll be significant. If you get to Brady, life can be a lot, if you get to Jared Goff, life can be a lot harder for him. On the other side, I agree that it's also a lot tougher for Brady when you get to him. Aaron Donald versus Shaq Mason, I think, could be one of the most significant matchups in this game. Shaq Mason was the top-rated guard by Pro Football Focus. He is the right guard, so keep in mind Donald, depending on the strong and weak side, could be lined up either on Mason or on the other side. But I think what will be crucial is how Mason does against Donald. Now Donald, very good with his hands, not overly big. He probably weighs about 280, 285. His bread and butter is definitely quickness, not as much power, even though he can be powerful against you, which is what makes him so tough. I think Mason, the key for him, will be getting his hands on him quickly. For Donald, on the contrary, he's one of the best swipers I've seen in the National Football League. Now, what I mean by that is he'll take his hands, and when that offensive lineman brings his out, he's just going to swipe across and then get by him. He's also got a nice little club and swim move that he uses. He'll take his hand in, and then he'll swim with the other arm. We'll see how that works in this game. I'm also intrigued to see how Dante Fowler does in this game. For the Rams, he is a former Jacksonville Jaguar. Many of my viewers are familiar with him. But how he can make plays, can he get to the quarterback, I think those will be some of the keys in this game. And for the Rams, I talked about the pressure in terms of the Patriots getting pressure on third downs. For them, it's a matter of can the receivers get open, especially with Stephon Gilmore being one of the better corners in the NFL. Can the receivers get open? Is Todd Gurley, as in will he be fully available? Because I think that can really change the tide of the game, whether we can get him involved. I don't think that Anderson will be able to carry the team this week. A lot of the little things I think will be the difference in this one. And we'll just see what happens. Nothing like Super Bowl Sunday coming up. Alright. So before this game took place, last week we had the Senior Bowl, the players of tomorrow, and a lot of people have been asking me what my thoughts were, who impressed, along those lines. So I'm just going to give you a quick little analysis on that. In my mind, out of the quarterbacks, because I get a lot of quarterback questions, the guy that I think rose the most was probably Drew Lock from Missouri. During the game, he had a nice little improvisational underhand pass. It sort of looked like a Brett Favre play a little bit. Not saying that his game in general is reminiscent of Favre, but that particular play was. He also had a pass that McLaurin from Ohio State kind of dove for but didn't quite catch. That would have been a touchdown. It was one of those balls that wasn't necessarily an easy catch, but it would have been nice to catch, and he threw it at a place where only the receiver could make the grab. So all in all, I think his stock rose the most. in terms of guys that maybe I was looking for but didn't really help their stock, I think Gardner Minshew of Washington State, he had, in my opinion, one nice pass toward the sideline. But apart from that, I really thought that he struggled. I wanted to see how he looked in terms of backpedal or his drops coming from under center, and he looked a little awkward to me. I think the timing was a little off. I think being a spread guy in Mike Leach's shotgun offense, I think it might take a little time for him to develop, a little time for him to get used to going under center and doing the drops, the 3-step drops, the 5-step drops. I think it'll take a little development on his end. Another one that I was another quarterback that I was kind of looking for that I don't really think helped himself in the Senior Bowl alone, not talking about the practices, but the game itself. Penn State's Trace McSorley. Watched him a number of times at college level. And my main concern going to the next level is definitely his accuracy at times. He had a few passes that sailed on him in that game. He had there was a pass in the red zone that he definitely let get away from him. He showed some of the good things about him also, though. He showed he can run a little bit. I think he has a great trait in terms of his competitiveness, his grit, but I think the accuracy is still a concern, and I don't think that he helped himself in the game on Saturday. Daniel Jones was the MVP of the game. I think for me, some people are saying that his stock dropped, but in my opinion, I don't know that it necessarily dropped. I think really we just kind of know what we're getting from him. Many of you read my scouting report on him on brosports.wordpress.com. For me, he is a good but not spectacular athlete. Kind of surprises you a little bit with his speed. He is I bet I've heard that he's ran about a 4.6 or in the 4.6s, but maybe it wouldn't shock me if he was slightly slower in actuality. He had a 1-yard zone read touchdown run that he had. He is fast enough to where you have to account for his running ability, but he's not a scrambler. He's definitely a pocket first guy. If he has a weakness, it may be that pocket awareness, knowing how to evade pressure, being aware of the pressure coming. And the other one may be that he will throw the ball accurately, but he doesn't throw a fastball. In other words, if you want him to bring it, his ball won't come at you hard. Some people even say he has somewhat of a duck every now and then, but for me, you kind of know what you're getting from him. I compared him a little bit to Andrew Luck. It's hard for me to think that he will be as good as Andrew Luck, but I think his game is eerily similar in terms of how he sits back in the pocket. He's got this little mechanism where he leans back and throws. A similar, I think, in terms of his athleticism. I might give Luck maybe a slightly better grade in terms of athleticism. But I think what you're talking about is probably a mid to late first round prospect, maybe second round if he slides, but I really think that he is what we thought he was, and I still think that Haskins is probably the front runner in terms of the quarterbacks still, despite him not playing, I think he's still the front runner. And for Kyler Murray, I think we'll know a little bit more of where he stands after some of the workouts, after the pro day, the combine, etc. If he participates, we'll see. I think really we probably know what we're getting out of him. Also, the question marks being his size, mainly, probably more so than anything else. Is he built for the NFL, etc., etc. I think the scouts in general, they will like his athleticism. Going to some other players that impressed me outside of the quarterbacks, I watched a little of the practice session on Thursday. I had my eye really interested in the red zone period with the wide receivers and DBs, and a couple of the guys that stood out to me, Deebo Samuel, a wide receiver for South Carolina, who I have heard his stock is rising. Hunter Renfrow, you know what you're getting out of him. I think he really can be a good slot guy in the NFL. He had a nice catch that was thrown by Will Greer. Forgive me on that. He caught a nice ball where Will Greer did a roll, well, not a rollout initially, but he ran out and chucked one over the middle, and I thought he had a nice catch on that. During the game, I think Andy Isabella showed that he really can be a valuable member of someone's football team. Now the questions are still, is he big enough? How does he project athletically? We'll see how he runs at the combine. But for me, during the season, a Biletnikoff finalist, led the nation in receiving yards per game at 141.5. Against Georgia, he had 219. So for me, that just proves that he can do it against real talent. And every time that he's been tested, this UMass receiver has shown that he can play. Some other notes about the Senior Bowl. Omenahu from Texas had a nice strip sack. That Saunders guy, number 99, Colin Saunders from Western Illinois. I read somewhere beforehand that he was about a 4th round projected prospect. I don't know how long ago that was posted, but after he did a freaking flip in front of everybody and absolutely beat somebody, whoever that guard was, he's a defensive tackle, whoever that guard was that he flat out beat on that sack that he had, I think that will show up on film. It's sometimes difficult to evaluate linemen in these games because they tend to just run base and they don't run blitzes, they don't run stunts. So I think, for me, for a prospect like him, I think you weigh the game or the game tape from the season perhaps over the game tape from the Senior Bowl. You're kind of, being an FCS prospect, you're kind of wondering, you measure maybe a slightly lower level of competition during the season, but during this game you're not running all the things that you would normally run, so you kind of have to decide, just kind of go with your gut after watching film, and it's sometimes a little tough to judge those things sometimes. I think his combine performance could be very important for him, and we'll see if he participates in the combine, how well he does. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to talk about a story that came out recently. I came across it last night, and it was about Tommy Nobis. Now, some of you may know who he is. Some of you may not know who he is. I think, in many respects, he's one of the greatest linebackers ever to play in the National Football League. But I think his name is lost, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But his name can be forgotten a little bit in terms of talking about the great ones. But the news that was released was that he died, I want to say, a year or two ago. And just recently, they discovered that in his brain, he had stage 4 CTE. In other words, he had like the highest level of CTE, basically. And there have been written accounts about how later in life he definitely, unfortunately, was a victim of the side effects that come with CTE. He was a very physical linebacker, about 240 pounds, and he played in the 1960s and 70s. So at that size, he was a big linebacker during that era. A quote from ESPN to give you a little bit of context. This is from his daughter, Devon Jakoniski. I hope I pronounced that right. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Quote, "He told me before he became very ill he would never turn his back on football or do anything different. But he would educate kids a little different in the game. There's something very wrong with slamming your head against a brick wall over and over again." In terms of his impact during his life, along with Bobby Knopp, I hope I pronounced that right as well, the chair of the Department of Special Education at Northside High School in Atlanta, they formed an advisory board after they realized that special needs kids had limited options in the area. And they discovered that Nobis, who, the linebacker in Atlanta, obviously a very prominent figure locally, they found out that he was involved in helping special needs kids and was also very involved in the Special Olympics. And so they formed, along with him, the Tommy Nobis Center. And here's a description online from TommyNobisCenter.org. Quote, "Helps individuals with all types of disabilities to enter or return to employment and to enjoy productive and independent lifestyles while contributing to greater business." So he apparently had a very significant impact in assisting those with special needs in both educational and employment opportunities. Thinking back on his football career, to give you a little information on who he was, how good he was, here's some notes to take in. So he was an All-American at Texas, a two-time All-American, won the Outland Award, which goes to the best lineman, and the Maxwell Trophy, which goes to the best player in college football. was responsible for stopping Joe Namath on 4th and inches at the end of the 1965 Orange Bowl. This was a controversial call. He is credited with the stop, number 60, if you watch the replays. I've watched this film many a times, and I still can't determine whether Joe Namath, this was on a sneak play near the goal line, inside the 1. I've watched it several times, and I still can't tell whether Namath got across or not. There are many who think that Namath scored, others that don't. Alabama had been the number 1 team, and actually they had already been declared the national champion, and because Alabama lost the game, they actually the following year decided to declare the national champion after the bowl games, after this loss occurred. And strangely enough, Alabama was not ranked number 1 at the end of the following season, but of course they won the national championship after a bowl game win. I love how that works. Back to Nobis. Was listed on Sports Illustrated's college all-century team in 1999. Shows you how good he was. First overall NFL draft pick by the Falcons in 1966. The Falcons were an expansion team at that time. A little more on that later. But he was their first pick. The Houston Oilers in the American Football League actually drafted him as well, but he chose to sign with the Falcons. In his rookie season, he had apparently, I don't know where the statistic, who counted this, but apparently they have verified that he had 294 total combined tackles as a rookie that year in the 66 season. Now, I said it in that manner because at the time they actually did not formally keep track of tackles. So I'm guessing that someone went back, watched the films, and verified this. Also keep in mind he would have done that in a 14-game schedule during that era. Was named the Sporting News Rookie of the Year that year. And then during his career in general, he was a 5-time Pro Bowler in 66, 67, 68, 70, and 72, and was named a first-team All-Pro in 1967. Let's see. His number has been retired, the number 60, by both the University of Texas and also the Falcons. And by the way, since he was their first draft pick for the expansion team, he is the only Atlanta Falcon to wear number 60. And also was a member of the 1960s NFL All-Decade team. Now, in terms of his legacy, reading through some of the facts, watching some film, doing some evaluation, his significance is interesting. He was really the face of the franchise. Maybe some people still consider him from start to finish, the face of the franchise. Maybe you've seen some other guys come through, guys like Neon Dion, maybe a Michael Vick in more contemporary times, but for a very solid chunk of time, I would say that Tommy Nobis, no questions asked, was considered the all-time Falcon, indisputably so. During his era, a 240-pound linebacker, as I mentioned earlier, he was in a situation where many people thought he belonged in the conversation as one of the top linebackers in the league. But during his era, though, he played during the same era as Dick Butkus, Ray Nitschke. When the merger took place, and if you count the American Football League in general as well, you had Will Lanier of the Chiefs, who is also considered one of the great ones. I beg your pardon. And I'll even throw in Nick Bonicani, who I think his profile rose a little bit when he became a Dolphin, and he played during those early 70s years for the Dolphins, and I think that raised his profile being the middle backer on those teams. So you think about all the players that were with him at the same time, at that same position, and that kind of lends, for me, I think that's what kind of lends itself to him being somewhat forgotten historically. Because when you look back, you think about Butkus being probably in the conversation for most intimidating player ever. You have Nitschke, who they would say Lombardi was the leader of the team, but in terms of players on the field, I think Nitschke, without a doubt, all the sources that have indicated it to me say that he was the leader of those great defenses on the field, as a player. Lanier, who was a very good linebacker for the Chiefs, who they won a Super Bowl, and he also has the story attached to him that he's one of the first prominent black players in professional football. At least, during his era, during the 60s and onward, being a black player, as good as he was, being one of the first middle backers, one of the first black middle backers, I should say. All credit in the world to him, but I think he has that story attached to him. But when you think about Nobis, he never played on a marquee team. Was never on a Super Bowl winning team. And for this Falcons franchise, you think even Butkus really, for much of his career, wasn't playing for a winner, but at least he had that kind of aura of that legendary status that kind of went with him. But for Nobis, he was just kind of a guy that lined up, hit you, and then after the play was over, it was over kind of thing, and then hit you another time. Lanier, you talk about a guy who played on some really good Chiefs teams, and in my opinion, his legacy, there's more of something to draw from in terms of his legacy, the impact, being a pioneer for black middle backers, when for a long time there was a unfair stereotype that black players couldn't play middle backer because they were supposedly not intelligent enough. But Willie Lanier broke that stereotype and really broke barriers. So he has that added legacy to him. And like I said, other guys like Bonaconte had that, association with the Dolphins during that era when they went to multiple Super Bowls, won 2 in a row, and obviously the undefeated team in 72. So this made me think, and obviously for my shows, I'm talking to not only people from my hometown in Jacksonville. Thank you for listening. But now living in Georgia, a lot of my friends here in Georgia are listening. And I appreciate your viewership and for listening. But anyway, I came up with a little bit of a connection here as I was thinking about Nobis and his impact. And for me growing up, the Jacksonville Jaguars were the expansion franchise that I was born into. Being a Jacksonville native, Tony Boselli was the first ever Jacksonville Jaguar draft pick. And Boselli, for me, was my favorite Jaguar. This was during the era. The Jaguars were, I would say, certainly better than what those Falcons were, especially in that period when Tony Boselli was with them. The Falcons were never really a contender, and the Jacksonville Jaguars in the mid to late 90s were definitely one of the best teams in the AFC. And you might know where I'm going with this, but it had me thinking. As good as Tony Boselli was, he was a premier left tackle during the late 90s, arguably the best during that time period, but he also happened to play in an era where Willie Rofe for the Saints was there. You had Orlando Pace that emerged, and he has the whole greatest show on turf thing linked to him. And then you think about a Jonathan Ogden that emerged. So you have 3 other really great tackles during that time period. Walter Jones, who played with the Seahawks, became a very good tackle in his own right. So you start to think of how Nobis was in his sort of golden age of middle backers, and then you think about Tony Boselli, who for several years was arguably the best left tackle in the National Football League, and you notice that he is not in the Hall of Fame. And Saturday, it kind of begs the question for me, will Tony Boselli become a Tommy Nobis? Or will Tony Boselli end up getting in? Or maybe could Tommy Nobis get in as a senior candidate down the road? Which I find unfortunate given the fact that he is no longer with us. But I do wonder. I wonder as a Jaguar fan, will Tony Boselli have his time, or as time goes by, will he be forgotten? Tommy Nobis, being an all-decade player, also, in my opinion, both of them, the face of their franchise during the early stage. Obviously, Jacksonville being another southern new franchise, not a particularly large market. And you kind of wonder, as time goes by, is Tony Boselli, are less people going to remember him? For me, he was the first. It wasn't Mark Brunell. It wasn't Keenan McCardell, Jimmy Smith, Fred Taylor, for me, that first great Jaguar, or at least I should say, for me, the best of the Jaguars during that era, no questions asked, was left tackle Tony Boselli, and that is certainly not a knock on any of those other Jaguars during that great period for Jacksonville. But for me, Tony Boselli was the face of the franchise. He was the first player for me, the first draft pick, and the first player for me that became my favorite Jaguar. And I think Tommy Nobis, for Atlanta fans, was their favorite player. And both, unfortunately, had injuries as probably a cause for not being on a higher level than they either could have been or should be perceived to be. Nobis had knee issues. The 69 season, the 71 season. Tony Boselli, I remember he had his injuries in the early 2000s. And strangely, when the Texans became a team, he went over there and didn't even actually play for them, but he was sent over to them as the expansion team. He was picked up by them. So I think in many ways you wonder about their legacies, and I think in many ways this can be said about many of the great ones in the National Football League who are not in the Hall of Fame. But for me, I personally wonder, will Tony Boselli be thought of as a good player, just a good player, or will he eventually be recognized in the same breath as guys like Orlando Pace or guys like Walter Jones or Jonathan Ogden? Because in my opinion, during that time, he was largely considered the best at his position, but I think as time has waned down, I think that his legacy has been subtracted from, and I wonder if retroactively some of those historians will speak up for Tony Boselli, and I also hope that many of them speak up for Tommy Nobis as well. So for me, I think that in many ways this story very much a connection for me in terms of Tommy Nobis and in terms of Tony Boselli. And this Saturday, I hope they get it right. I hope they place Tony Boselli in the Hall, but I also hope they don't forget about guys like Tommy Nobis, who in his respective city laid the groundwork not only on the field, but also had tremendous impact off the field. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. God bless.